Hello, welcome, and thank you for coming. I always forget to introduce myself, but I'm Amanda Knowles, the coordinator of the NSC Art Gallery. I also teach in the art department at North Seattle College. I'm pleased to work with Karen Stilldryer, who will be letting people in and is manically letting people in at the moment. We are so pleased to be able to take advantage of technology to have people continue to come to talk to and with us. The NSC Art Gallery continues to host a virtual visiting artist lecture series every other week this quarter, starting with today's lecture. I urge you to visit our website to see the list of upcoming visiting artists and for the links to recordings of last quarter's lectures. Today we will hold the 6th lecture in this series that we started last fall. We will begin this lecture with some acknowledgements. First is the land acknowledgement. On behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And then a labor acknowledgement. We pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor that created the United States and from which we all benefit. We remember that our nation is built on the labor of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the US from the African continent, and we recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge immigrant labor and recognize that voluntary, forced, and prison labor contribute to the building and maintenance of our nation. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of uprisings for racial equity that continue across this country in response to inequity and generations of structural racism against Black communities. Black lives, Black minds, and Black voices matter. And then the next slide, I'm gonna just allow you all to read it, but although it is one thing to acknowledge, we also have to have some action. And so I am just putting in front of you the actions of the art department at North Seattle College, as well as our institution, to just sort of show you that we are, we're working to do things. Thank you. You are in for a treat. It is a privilege to introduce you to today's visiting artist, Faye Jones. I remember the first time that I saw Faye's work. I was new to the city and I was being taken out to dinner at Nishino in Madison Park. I was nervous about the dinner. The room was abuzz and I was sinking. Nishino has a very large mural-like piece in my memory by Faye that fills the space. The work buoyed me, entranced and calmed me throughout the night. One of the first times I met Faye, I felt the same way. She has an amazing way of seeing, calming, and including you. Her work is so entirely her own. The cast of characters is abundant, and the pairings and situations they find themselves in are evocative of a dream world. You'll see what I mean. Faye Jones received a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design. She has been awarded the Joan Mitchell Painters and Sculptors Grant, the Seattle Art Museum Poncho Artist of the Year Award, 2 grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Washington State Arts Commission grant, and the La Napoli Art Foundation from the La Napoli Art Foundation. Her work is included in the collections of the Portland Art Museum, Haley Ford Museum of Art in Oregon, and the Seattle Art Museum, the Tacoma Art Museum, and in the collections of the cities of Seattle and Portland. There have been many major exhibitions of her work. This last November, she mounted a show at Russo Lee Gallery in Portland entitled Faye Jones' New Work. The year before, she presented work in tandem, works by Faye Jones and Robert C. Jones at both James Harris Gallery and G. Gibson Gallery here in Seattle. She has shown work at Russo Lee in Portland, Oregon since 2018, and before that at the Laura Russo Gallery since 1988. In Seattle, she has shown at James Harris Gallery, before that Grover Thurston Gallery, and before that Francine Setter's Gallery, and has had a number of solo exhibitions and has been part of many, many group shows throughout the years. If you have taken light rail here in Seattle, you will have seen her Westlake Station mural commissioned by Metro Transit. It is an absolute and complete pleasure to introduce to you Faye Jones. Before we start, if questions arise during the talk that you have, please write them in the chat and we'll get to them. There you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Most of the images are more or less chronological. And because I'm doing this for the first time, you can tell I'm very nervous. I really want to talk about what one of the aspects of COVID's effect on me, aside from being sheltered in place big time because of my age and because of my family's extensive pods. You know, I'm pretty much on my own. On the other hand, pretty much I was doing what I always do. It's the advantage of being being an artist. So in some ways, my life was exactly the same as it was before COVID. My studio is on the premises, so I can go out my door and go down 2 sets of stairs to a very nice studio with heat in the floor. So that part of my life has been very similar. But what is not similar is what feeds into you as an artist. I'm not by nature a researching artist, so I pretty much rely on day-to-day things that feed into me. And they can be really simple, like just going to the grocery store or taking a walk or reading. But even going to the grocery store is so fraught now, and that's a word that we will get rid of when COVID is over. So I don't have the pleasure of sort of wandering around the aisles and watching people. I go with a very efficient list and I get out of there as quickly as I can in hopes nobody breathes on me. So that is just to say that the last work that I'm going to show you is the most recent and is what's done in this past year. So I did 10 paintings of 2 trees that were outside my window. And then when I went to work on bigger paintings, I relied on the titles of 2 paintings that I did years ago, including the one at Nishino that Amanda mentioned, which is called Touch and Go, and which I painted in 1990. And another painting is called Past and Future, Do-Si-Do, and I think comes from the early 80s. Both of those titles sort of came back around to me. In 1990, I painted Touch and Go because my first grandchild was born and a brother of mine was murdered. And then Touch and Go Repeat, which I painted this year, was because of COVID. So now, having said that, I don't think it's a very clear introduction, but I thought I should say that first. So now we can go to the images. I think this is from around 1990. And it's right next to me on the wall. And I've kept this painting because it contains images that I was using in larger paintings at the time, but it was also a challenge from something my mother observed years ago. And I'm the oldest of 6 children, and nobody in my immediate family was an artist. But my mother observed that generally I started in the upper left-hand corner and just worked my way straight across the page till I got to the lower right-hand corner, which is sort of an explanation for why there's nothing remotely like Renaissance perspective in anything that I do. So in a way, I was channeling my mother, who was still alive at the time, and I did start in the upper left-hand corner, and I ran out of energy sort of 3/4 of the way down and stopped when I got to the 2 pools. And so the white images at the bottom were almost a coda to this painting that was dedicated to my mother's observation. And because I've always felt that I would be more interested in this painting than anybody else, I've actually kept it, and it's on the wall to my right. So I've not got tired of it, and that's not true with everything I do. So this is one of 2 paintings that I did. There was a local poet named Jesse Bernstein here in town. It was he had an enormous influence on this community, but he was also a person with with demons. And this is called Poet's Limbo. And it's basically, I didn't know him very well, but because it's a small town, I met him a number of times. And eventually, sort of late in his life, he married several times. He used to call me on the phone and talk to me about marriage. So this is dedicated to him. But I've also was like the fact that the center figure in here above the bride, if you straighten her out, would be a completely unrealistic figure. And at the same time, when I was painting it, it seemed the only way I could do was to make this strange figure into an arch. And this is a large painting. I used to work on arche en tout cas. So that I think is 52 inches wide. And this is 2 sheets of that. So it's probably about 104 inches wide. I got obsessed with donkeys, and part of it was reading. I have a children's book called Myth and Animal. I think it's, or Animal and Beast, Animal and Beast, or something like that. It's a golden book, and it was printed in France. And I think I bought it for my children, but actually I never gave it to them. I don't even think I ever showed it to them because I was fascinated. It's just the history of animal imagery and art going way, way back. And there's a whole page on donkeys. And one of the stories about donkeys was about Nero's wife. And I can't remember her name, but she traveled with 400 she-asses with jeweled hoofs so that she could have a fresh ass milk bath every morning and every night. And I realized that was a indication of, I don't know. We can't even imagine that kind of. I can't even think of what the word is right now. But anyway, the donkey became. I've spent a lot of time in Mexico where donkeys are still working. They're on the streets every day, and they travel next to the cars. And there's also just the interesting thing of the donkey as a beast of burden. I think somehow, in a way, women can relate to that. So this is another painting that I have kept because it's, I think just the making of it was so strange. It's called Yellow Skirt. It's basically, I think yellow is a difficult color to work with. So this was another sort of chore I gave myself to see if I could make a painting with a large yellow skirt and not muck it up and not actually, put flowers on it or change it, just keep this perfect yellow. And so every once in a while you do something that you feel good about. And this is a painting I feel good about just because the task that I gave myself, I stuck with it. This is a series of paintings that I did. I don't even know the date, but I've lost people in my life too soon. My father was one, and actually it turns out he's not my real father, but that's a whole nother story. He died young. He had emphysema and cirrhosis of the liver. And this is a painting dedicated to my brother John, who was killed. And it's not these. There are 4 of them altogether. One is my father. One is my closest friend growing up. One is my sister, my one sister, and the other is that's it. So this is dedicated to my brother, but it really doesn't have. It's not specifically him. It's a little bit what he looked like, but also I was old enough when he was born to remember him as a baby. So I can't really explain the images that are in here, but it's one of 4 paintings. And all of those paintings, I still feel very strongly about. Thanks, we go. This is another one. And this is my best friend and I lived next door to each other. And she was very chubby and I was very skinny at that time. We both played violin. And if you know anything about playing the violin, we didn't have particularly good form. I didn't have my hand properly. I'm the one on the right and she's the one on the left. And she was killed in a head-on automobile accident at a very young age. The The monkey on the left is just called Monkey in Red Skirt. The monkey on the left is based on drawings that Seurat made for the Jean-Jacques painting in Chicago. And I've used a number of monkeys over the years, and I'm not a very careful, I don't do things particularly accurately. I still pretty much draw an elephant the way I did when I was 5. So I relied on a Seurat monkey and a monkey in a book of monkeys that I had for just the sort of general anatomy of the monkey. And I love that Seurat monkey. It isn't even particularly noticeable in the painting in Chicago, but if you don't know Seurat's drawings, they are extraordinary. And so the drawing that's in this book of Seurat drawings that I have is basically, and I have actually made a cutout of this monkey. I've used it so much I can trace around it. This painting is called Adopt Me. And it was from a friend telling me a story about when she was a child. Her family situation was not good, and she had a teacher that she loved. And she described going to that teacher's house one day with her, a little bag of clothes, and knocking on the door and asking the teacher to adopt her. And I can't really explain the imagery in this related to that, but that was the beginning of this painting, was just that, something you can visualize, a child wanting out of a situation and wanting to be in a better situation, and having the avenue in the place of a beloved teacher. I don't know, somehow I could understand that. So I cannot explain how the images in this painting relate to that. Actually, the source of this painting. And this is another one that's probably 104 inches wide. And when I was a child, we went and stayed with my grandparents in a town off the peninsula in Massachusetts. And what I really remember is going from my grandparents' house on this path through, it was a little bit spooky, going actually through morning glories, but they were beautiful. They were the blue morning glories. They weren't the morning glories that we deal with here. But there was something about the shaded path that was always a little scary. And but at the far end was the ocean, basically, or it's across from Boston Harbor. So there was that thing of looking forward to the pleasure at the end and being slightly frightened of the path to it. This is from 1994. I was asked by Art Fair, by Irene Mahler, actually. She put me together with a woman named Marcia Bartholomew, who had just started her own press here, Beta Press. I had only made prints when I was in art school, and I wasn't a particularly good printmaker. I wasn't serious enough to really learn all the technical stuff. So this was to do a poster for Art Fair. And I had 4 artist proofs of this print, and I gave them all to my children, because when I got all through this, I didn't really want to look at it. It was such a chore. But in the process, I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned was that I could work with Marcia Bartholomew, who's an extraordinarily good, she's a master printer. And she could keep me going. I would crash in the afternoon, and then I would look at what I'd done, because everything is done backwards. I was really a neophyte in this particular project, but in the end, it turned out okay. And as a result, I had a working. We were planning to work this past summer together again. We did make a print last year together, but from 1994, pretty much for 20 years, I had the great pleasure of working with her, and it was good. She could read my mind, which was very good. I was always responsible for the imagery, but she was the one responsible for making it work, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Oh, that's the last print I made, which is very different, and that is from last year. It's called Dusk, And that is Marcia holding it up for the final okay to print, which is why I kept the entire image. And this was just a repeat of a pattern of trees that I painted all of last year. It was after my husband died, and I looked out my bedroom window every morning at these trees, and I incorporated them in almost all the paintings that I did that year. And so this print, because it was many years later, was so much more fun to do, even though it was a lot of work. I think by then we knew between us that we could come out at the end, with something that I liked. And this is quite unlike most things that I do. And I actually still, the images of the animals at the bottom are images that I've used over and over and over again. So this is the other side of my life, is I have a huge family. And this is after that. My husband is the handsome guy in front of me in this. And these are some of my children and grandchildren. And that's been an enormous part of my life, I have to say. It's, at various times it was overwhelming. And now it's underwhelming because I hardly get to see them, or I get to see them so carefully now. And I'm grateful for all the years that we had lots and lots of family gatherings, and I'm looking forward to them again. But this is a major component of who I am. It's the best way to describe this. It's nice to see them all. And then this, I won't dwell on this story, but it's amazing. 2 days before my husband's memorial service, I found out from my youngest son in LA that I had a different father. And so I'm one of those extraordinary stories from 23andMe or Ancestry.com that turned out well. And, the joke is all the perps are dead, so we can't even confront anybody about what happened. But as a result of this, these are two of my half brothers who I never knew until a year and a half ago. And I'm very fond of them, and I feel extremely lucky. And I have other two half brothers that I grew up with, and I thought they were my whole brothers, but they're actually in some ways more half than these two, which is very interesting. This is from a whole series of paintings about water. I'm morbidly afraid of drowning, and yet my choice of place to live is to be on the edge of the water. So I think I like where the land meets the water. Once I'm on the water, I'm quite terrified. This is called Rising Water because this looks like a pretty thing, but it's actually a flood. Well, I guess that's what happens with a flood. Life, which is beautiful, all of a sudden becomes drowned. And then I actually did make a print very much related to this in Tyotin, where we have a press, which I'm no longer involved with physically. The print is not nearly as deep as this. I think that's the different. Printmaking is a flat medium. And so this is one of many water paintings. I think the other ones are coming up. This is a water painting. I live in West Seattle. This is a site that you see all the time. And this too. I have a friend of mine swims in a wetsuit, and I wasn't exactly sure what it looked like. So her son actually took a photograph of her from the back. I wanted to make it more or less accurate. So this is based on a friend. I think the title of this is "Be Careful What You Wish For." I think that explains it. I'm not sure. And these diptychs are painted on Okawara paper, which is a Japanese paper that I've used for years and years. The Argentuka that I use is a very thick, or 50% rag paper, French, that you can buy by the roll. And then I discovered the Okawara paper, which is a meter wide, and they always say it's 36 inches wide, but it's not. It's a meter wide and 6 feet tall. And it's creamy colored, and it's lightweight but very sturdy. A lot of paint and a lot of brushwork goes into my paintings. I rely on being able to cover things up. And so I have to have paper that survives. And for some reason, Okawara paper, which is designed as a printmaking paper, suits me just fine. So this is, be careful what you wish for. So these are from a few years ago. This is called Coming Ashore. I mean, I think we're all very aware of immigration, and I've always been particularly aware because I've spent time in Mexico and I have a son who lives in Mexico. The whole issue of borders, I mean, it's gone on forever. Whoever we are, we all have people who, unless we're natives, we have people who came to this country for some reason. And in one story in my family is that somebody was 13 years old and, on the coast of Scotland working on a farm, and he and his friend went too close to a ship and were shanghaied and came to the United States as indentured servants. Obviously, it's all over the world, and it's so I never paint anything realistically, but you sort of get the idea from this. This is a painting I love because underneath it is a completely different painting of my next door neighbor's backyard. And I could never make it work, but I'm by nature, I'm from New England. I'm frugal, so I don't throw anything away. This is an entirely different painting painted on top of that. And sometimes those accidents work. And I've always felt that the image that you see was very quick on top of a lot of sort of slogging labor that never went anywhere. These are grandchildren of mine at my 80th birthday party. The one on the left is it does actuarial tables found for a business. The next one in the right, red skirt, in the Seattle Fire Department now. And the next one with the death mask is my grandson Travis, who's Mr. Tie-Dye. And the last one is the one on the left's girlfriend. It was just this was a very nice birthday party that my friend Linda Beaumont threw for me. And Spike Mafford had a costume box and a camera. And somebody said, Faye, you should come and just see what your grandchildren have just done. And they did this, who knows who has a really good imagination? They all do. It's pretty amazing. They did this so quickly. And this is one of my favorite family photographs of all time. So I'm sharing it with you. This is a whole series of paintings I did on the circus because it died. And it's not as though the first time I ever went to a circus, I was 21. I was married. I was living in Providence, Rhode Island. It wasn't as though it was a childhood thing of mine, but there's something, it's always fascinated me. Also, just the people who work in circuses, the sort of generations of people who are circus performers. So I did a whole series of paintings they started from an article in the New York Times that was on circus families before the major circus folded. And then I do have to, I have to do something sort of accurately. Like I wanted to know what a tiger's face looked like. So if you go on the internet, you look at a tiger's face and then or if you look it up on your phone, then it's gone. So you kind of have to, I love that. That's my idea of research. I love the fact that you get an idea and somehow it comes out looking like a tiger, even though if you were another tiger, you might not recognize that. And this was also generated from that same article. That's also, obviously, this is called Large and Lost. And this is on Okawara paper, so it's, they're small for elephants, but I don't know, I loved painting this painting, and I got probably one step beyond the elephant that I painted when I was 5, but not really. It's funny to look at these. Okay, so now we're getting up to last year, which was, my husband had idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So he was really sick for a year, and I was his main caregiver. And I have to say it was sad, but it wasn't a chore. He was he was amazingly cheerful and sociable. And then when he was gone, he was gone. And that's something that's very hard to deal with. There's a song, a Mexican song, it's from the 19th century called Escolandrinas, which has to do with yearning for home, which is also sort of what happens when you lose somebody that you love. So this is a painting in progress. This painting actually it just never worked. It got tighter and tighter and tighter. And Jim Harris came to my studio about that time. And the other things that I've been working on seemed okay. And they were all had the same pattern of the variation of the trees at the bottom. And I said, I think I've killed this one. He said, well, you've killed things before and you make them come back. So I didn't rip it up, and I didn't say sometimes it's easy, as you all know who are artists, to say, okay, it's not great, but it's okay. And you can't generally, you can't live with that. So this is just in progress. You can see those are all cut out swallows that are push pinned onto the paper. This is how it ended up. This painting is on view again, Jim Harris's gallery. It'll be his last show. And the painting that was so dead became this painting, which is still, I don't know, I still love this painting. It's called Memento Mori. This is from that same series, only, I got the trees out of there. These were also painted, they were painted after my husband died, but they were also painted after I found out I had a different father. And that's actually an extremely confusing thing to deal with 82 years later. So I can't explain what these are, but I was dealing with a lot of personal things at that time that were very interesting. And those are the trees. So you can see I make them up. Those are also the same trees at the bottom. And this is called Storm Warning. These are also the same trees. I very seldom leave that much space around things. I can kind of sort of congratulate myself for leaving that much unmessed up paper. This was painted at the same time as all those paintings with the trees. I wanted to do a painting of the sky is falling, that old sort of Chicken Little thing. So this one is, this is Okawara paper, and this is 3 panels high. So this is the top panel. And in the process of painting this painting, the title changed from the sky is falling to the sky was falling. When you see the bottom of it, you'll see at the bottom is basically my first great grandchild. So this is the top panel of the sky was falling. And this is, basically I use acrylic paint, but I also use quite a bit of collage. So all the little oval coin shapes are pieces of paper that have been glued on. And the liquid that comes out and runs through the entire painting is all cut up strips of paper. They were actually left over from an Ann Hamilton show at the Henry Gallery. And for some reason, I took all that printed material that you were free to take. I took it home, and afterwards I wondered why. And then I just made use of it. So this is the top of The Sky Was Falling. And there's the painting. And there's my grandson and his girlfriend and the mother of my great grandchild. I didn't paint them on purpose. This is the kind of thing that you do. These are the people I see all the time. I love them. And the great grandchild was born 10 days before Bob died. And I think Bob waited for that birth. So, and there he is. So this is COVID. This is 2020 summer, This is the only time my family has gotten together in a big group since last February. My youngest son and his family were visiting from LA. It took them a lot to have the courage to even take a vacation. They were given a friend's cabin on Lopez. And in the process, they spent one night in my studio, isolated from the rest of from me. And my grandson, Mr. Tie-Dye, made all of us tie-dyed masks. So this is not my entire family, but this is a lot of them, including one person who's not related. And my daughter-in-law, who's with the white hair next to the cypress tree, writes law for the legislature, but she makes these phenomenal cakes. So these were made for my granddaughters from LA, these enormous cakes. But this is the only time we've gotten together this entire year. This is just to show scale, I think, but the man in the blue hat is somebody, when I was probably 16, I had a terrible crush on him. He was in his 20s, and he's become my cousin's bête noire in this little town where they live, and he would come and go swimming every day in front of where my cousin lived. And so I painted this portrait of him, which I didn't want to get close enough because I would have lost the crush that I had when I was 16 big time. But this at least shows you the scale of the painting. The figures in these Okawara paintings are usually just about life size. I just had a show in November in Portland. So I painted 10 paintings of two trees that I could see from my dining room table. And I painted them, and it was at the beginning, before we were completely closed down. I think it was in February, and we knew things were not going to be good. I couldn't go to my studio and just start in as though it was life as usual. I was basically watching these two trees that are a deciduous tree in front of a fir tree. And I sat at my dining room table for a month and painted those in watercolor. And then I decided, well, I'll paint another 10 paintings that are more what I would usually paint. So this is one of those. This is called Motherhood. And this is also from, I can't remember the title of this, but these are all on just Italian watercolor paper, and they're quite small. And by then I'd moved from the dining room table back into my studio. So these have acrylic paint in them. They're not just watercolor. I'm not showing all 10 of these paintings, but they start with the deciduous tree with no leaves on it. So it's basically a filigree in front of the fir tree. And then by the time I did the last one, the deciduous tree was had fully leafed out and had obliterated basically, or covered up the fir tree. But it was also the year of the rat, and I have lots of rat stencils in my studio, so I can put rats anywhere. So this is also one of those paintings. And these are small. These are all just on watercolor paper. Okay, and this is, I think this is the last image. Yeah, and this is the Touch and Go Repeat is the title. But like the Touch and Go painting that I did in 1990, it really just has to do with the fragility of, I don't even like to use the word relationship, but that's it. The people that you're close to, you can't take it for granted. The strangest thing about painting this painting was I was never able to get the color. I usually work with pretty full palette, and this painting just stayed pastel from beginning to end, except for the black that runs across the top and the woman on the lower left who has red hair. Aside from that, I could never, for some reason, I had to keep it on this very soft palette. You know, my intent was to make sure that all the figures in it touched, and because I have so little, I always blame it on my eyes, but I really don't have a good sense of deep space. They really are kind of smashed up together. And in the end, I liked the painting, although I was surprised at how it worked out. So that's it on the images.
There's a lot of clapping. We're all clapping. There are also a lot of questions, so I'm going to sort of go from the last one back up. So I'm sorry about the order. It's just the way that I can kind of do this. Is it okay to ask questions, Faye?
Yes, of course.
Okay, good. Ellen Ziegler wrote, I remember when you changed from oil to acrylic and you were so frustrated. Can you talk about changing media?
I don't think she could remember that because I did it long before she was born, I think. I have the only oil painting I've made in the last 50 years or more is one that I think I gave it to Ken Kelly and he painted over it. But that I abandoned oil painting almost as quickly as I got out of art school, which was in 1957. So I'd like to know what oil painting Ellen remembers, but I don't think, you know, acrylic paint just worked much better for me. Oil painting, I think oil painting has cachet, you know. Acrylic paint has none. But every time I'm much too impatient. In art school, when I paint a painting, it always turned to mud. So acrylic painting, I can paint over and over and over things, and the top layer is always fresh. So, you know, I always feel as though I should apologize for it, but in fact, it's just worked well for me.
It's great. Thank you.
I don't know if I answered Ellen's questions.
Oh, Ellen, do you want to pop in?
Faye, you know, maybe I had just met you as when you had your studio on Westlake. And am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, and that's where I painted the one oil painting that I've painted in the last 60 years.
Well, I think you probably just told me about that.
Yeah, could be.
I change media every 2-3 years, and I'm just curious because it's a very different approach.
Well, I think the one medium that I did change to was watercolor, because everybody says watercolor is so difficult. Well, you can make it difficult, but actually, it's also lovely, you know. That's really, and printmaking, which I consider to be a completely different medium. Watercolor, I had not painted watercolors at all, and I copied all of Goya's Caprichos one year, and that's 82 watercolors. And I thought, okay. You know, the nice thing about watercolors is if you don't like what you've got, you can wash it off, which you cannot do with acrylic. It's fair to say with acrylic, you have to pretty much make one plastic layer over another.
There's another question, which is, and this may be, you know, you can pick a perfect day or whatever, but what is your daily routine like?
At the moment, I'm catching up on all the things I didn't get done going up until my show in November. And I always have this. When I'm working, I work pretty regularly. I get up in the morning and I have coffee and I do the crossword puzzle and I go to my studio and I work during daylight. I'm lucky. I have, I have no other obligation aside from going to my studio. So when I'm working, I work pretty regular hours. And when I'm not working, I'm like a squirrel, you know, but I always think after you've finished I hate my body of work, for lack of a better description. I think you need to take a little break. I needed to take a little break in December, and I say it's like letting all the water out of the bathtub. And then I'm about to go back to work, and it'll be different, which is kind of a relief. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's a beautiful way of saying that, with the letting all the water out of the You just need a refresh. That's great.
Well, I always think if you go to your studio every day, as people will say, I go to my studio every day, you think, well, maybe you ought to take a break. This, I don't know. Everybody has different work habits.
Yeah.
So.
Somebody asked about the children's book. It was a golden children's book, right? That you were saying that you got the mules from, or the.
Yeah,
They just wanted to know what it was.
I'd have to leave and go find it. It's in my dining room.
All right. Well, maybe if that person can we can be in contact with.
Yeah, that would be fine. Because I just gave all the information to a friend in New York who really would have liked to have had this. I think it was printed first in France, and then there was an English version, and that's what I have. And it's hardbound. I mean, it's not what you think of as a little golden book. It's really thick and wonderful. And mine is a mess because it's sort of falling apart.
Well used. There's another question, which is, I remember you saying years ago, throw things away, sort it out, or it will make you crazy. Have you found you have been able to lighten your load of works that you didn't feel quite made it by your estimation?
Oh, it's easy for me.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And then every once in a while, when you go through the stuff you've saved, you do another clean out. I don't know. And I'm actually very separated. I'm not, my paintings are not my children. So once they're finished, I'm pretty much hands off, with the exception of the few things that I actually showed you. I've been lucky that I sell well. I have to say I'm very lucky, but not everything that I've done interests me enough for me to keep it. And a lot of stuff, I don't know. I think it's hard to throw things away. You have to do it on the right day, and with no regrets. I think that's the key. Okay.
There's another question. Looking back on your career as an artist, is there anything you think you would have benefited from in terms of support as an artist and a mother? What would you like to see happen for upcoming generations of artists who are mothers?
I think it's always tricky. I have a neighbor who's an artist and has 3 young children, and her youngest child went off to school, and all of a sudden COVID hit, and all 3 children were at home, and she was losing her much sought after studio time. And I told her, I said, well, you'll get it back. You just have to think of this as a glitch in your dream plan just got shattered, but it won't be shattered forever. I think it's hard. At one point, when my kids were all in school, I finally realized that they were probably going to survive. I think I watched one of my children jump from rock to rock on a beach outside of Anacortes one time, and my instinct was to save him from drowning. He was probably 4 at the time, and I thought, no, he's actually physically. And I remember going through this. He's physically capable of going from rock to rock. If he falls, it's an accident, and we're here, and we'll pick him up, pull him out of the water. And at that point, I figured I could give myself, when all my children were in school, I basically worked Seattle Public School hours. Because I work by myself, I don't have other people, and I've worked in group studio situations, but basically I work alone. And when they came home from school, basically I dropped my brushes. But that's not a bad. You just have to determine that in those hours you don't do anything else. You don't clean the house. You don't fiddle around. You just. I'm not a very disciplined person, but in that way I became quite disciplined. I'm actually surprised, but I did. I don't know if that helps, because it's I'd be a different person without them. So I have to think of it as a plus. There were times when it wasn't easy, But I think everybody has things in the way of their getting into their studio, I think.
Great. Another question. There are lots of questions, so you can just tell me when you're done. But how do you see the gutter or the middle section of the diptychs? There are a couple of questions about the, double and triple pieces and that sort of thing. In some of your paintings, there's white space. In others, like the one where you showed earlier with the donkey reflecting on itself, there's no space, but a line where the image almost reflects on itself. I'm curious how this middle area plays into your narrative. You use it so well.
Oh, thank you. I actually like the diptych format. It's practical with Okawara paper because it's actually cheaper in a way to frame two paintings than it is to frame something with oversized plex. So that's a practical consideration. But also, I think I like I like working on them that way, that they're next to each other, particularly with the gutter. I'm talking about because they're close, but they're not exact. So in a way, you've got a little bit of shift. And my feeling is the person looking at them can make that. You can make your eye go across that gap. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. To me, it's almost as though it adds some kind of energy. But with that last painting that I showed, Touch and Go Repeat, I could not do that. I had the two pieces of paper separated, and then I realized I couldn't have them separate. I put them together, and then the framers have to deal with this afterwards. Then I turn them over and I attach them so that it's one big piece, which means that everything is just slightly off square. But I don't know. I've always liked that, just the little jolt that you get in that space. I don't know if it works for outside, but for me it does. And it works while I'm working on the paintings too.
There's a lot of questions about the specific, like the birds or the dragonflies and the symbolism. Can you just talk real quickly about your thoughts on animals and how they sort of come in and if they mean specific things and that?
Well, the dragonfly in many cultures is a sign of good luck, and they're quite beautiful. If you ever if you get close to a dragonfly, they're kind of magical. And the thing with the golondrinas, the swallows, that whole, we used to have swallows' nests in the eaves above our bedroom, and we had a house up in the Skagit. And it was, when they started nesting, it was lots of fun. It was kind of messy too, but they swoop. They're really quite beautiful. And then spent a lot of time in Mexico, and the song Escolandrinas is a very famous Mexican song sung by everybody. It's sung by Placido Domingo, it's sung by Nat King Cole. You'd all recognize it if you think you don't know it, you do. You've heard that music. And just that, I think for a lot of cultures, various animals have symbolism. And mine is probably a little sloppy, but also, there are certain things you're afraid of, like snakes and that kind of thing. So I probably use them. I use them probably haphazardly, I should say. But with the positive things like the dragonfly and the swallow, I kind of get that.
There was a question about your decision to copy the Goya, Los Caprichos, and thoughts on cultural appropriation. Can you talk about your decision to copy the Goya series?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Thoughts on...
partly the Caprichos are extraordinary prints, for anybody who knows about the history of printmaking. They're etchings, and I've actually seen all of them several times. It was a nice big Goya show in Mexico City not too long ago, and I was able to see not a very good edition, but I've since I was in art school, I've had it's a little pocketbook of the caprichos. And there were some of them, I feel as though I painted them myself. The images were somehow very familiar to me. So I thought, oh, I'll copy those. It's very interesting, like the donkey and the donkey sitting there painting. And they were some of the sort of more funny ones. And then I realized, well, I could just copy all of them, and basically I was making them exactly the same size as the prints, which is pretty much 6 inches by 9 inches. And I was painting watercolors that were 6 by 9. But of course I was making up the color. And as I said, I had never painted watercolors before. And what I found out was that the images that I loved were harder for me to copy, or they were less interesting for me to copy than the images that I found very difficult to look at. So it was actually a good project for me.
And it happens in a lot of cultures, right? Like that is a sort of a learning experience, is to copy some of the masters of the people who have done like. And
you do in the process. It's very interesting. If you copy 82 or 80, I don't know, maybe they're 81. And then I added, at the time I'd been in an automobile accident. I had one of those high collars on, and the Goya's Caprichos start off with an image of him with a high collar, which I think has to do with goiter. I'm not sure. So that was sort of funny. If you've copied somebody's work pretty carefully, you get some of their tricks, like I can do his little feet sticking out from under women's skirts really as well as Goya can. So that was interesting. And I love Goya's paintings too. So.
And then Sheila Coppola, who's a master printer, as we all know, and is right there waving at us.
Yes, I've worked with Sheila.
Doesn't like the master portion of that. Can you speak a moment about your print, about what printmaking has given your paintings and what your painting process has given your prints? That sort of fertilization back and forth.
Well, the great thing was I learned about, because Sheila was there, in those early days of printmaking. It wasn't so much that I learned how to do things in reverse, but I learned how to do things in sequence. Is that right? Would that be the right word, Sheila? I learned how things could go. It was so different from painting, which was so spontaneous and quick. I learned how to layer things to get what I would get more easily in painting, in printmaking. Or maybe it's just that I learned not to be discouraged, right? I don't know.
My students who are in this lecture, thank you for that. Yes. Is there anything else that people would like to offer in the?
Thank you.
We'll be sharing the chat with you, so you'll get all of the comments throughout.
Thank you, Amanda. I have to say I'm impressed with people like you who can just completely change the way you're doing things because of something that's out of all of our control, like COVID. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing.
We don't have much choice, right?
No, I know. When I have a son who's a musician in Mexico, and he had to buy a new computer to work, remotely with his students in Mexico City. He's 40 miles away. And it's a very similar thing. And they were ahead of him technically, but he was ahead of them musically. So it was, it was an essential complete switch in the way you usually do things. So I think I might just give up. So I think you're doing really extraordinary. And I hope I did okay. I don't know.
You did great. Yay. So many people here. Everybody is just saying really amazing things in the chat. So we'll share that with you.
Well, thank you
so much for your
you
time.
all. This is the first time I've ever done anything remotely like this, and remote's the word, I guess. So
Remotely,
thank you.
virtually and remotely like this.